And today's movie begins with Queen Anne wearing fancy royal clothes, sharing a vulnerable moment with her close friend and trusted advisor, Sarah. The Queen asks Sarah how her speech is and if she stutters. Then Anne takes Sarah to a hidden corridor to another room to show her a surprise. She's going to give her a castle, and Anne tells her that she's been wanting to give her something for a while now, but with her husband winning the war, she thinks it's the best of times to do so. Sarah tells her that the war hasn't ended yet, even though they won the current battle. In contrast, Abigail, who's Sarah's cousin, goes through a rough journey in a carriage with the goal of finding a job in the palace. When she arrives at the palace gates, she looks messy and dirty. She hands her credentials to Mrs. Meg, the strict housemaid, and is told to clean up before meeting Sarah. Another housemaid named Sally takes Abigail to a cleaning area, unaware of Abigail's plan. The room they go to is Sarah's private chamber. There, Abigail opens up and tells Sally about her connection with Sarah, begging for a job in the palace. She explains that she's a distant relative and desperate for work. At the same time, something unusual happens inside the palace, and there was a duck race taking place. In the midst of this strange event, Sarah and Harley, the Queen's advisor, argue about Sarah's sudden acquisition of the palace. Harley, supported by the Prime Minister, wants a peace treaty with France, but Sarah and her husband, General Marlborough, believe that the French should make the first move for peace. Harley disagrees, saying that there isn't enough money, and asks for a meeting with the Queen. Queen Anne steps forward, preparing for her upcoming encounter with the Russian ambassador, and Sarah, disapproving of her extravagant makeup, voices her criticism and suggests that she take charge of the meeting instead, and dismisses Queen Anne from the room. Abigail, under orders from Mrs. Meg, endures the harsh reality of palace life, scolding her hand while cleaning floors with lye-infused solution. Sally, seeing her agony, advises her to use gloves. In the dead of night, the palace's calm silence shatters as Anne suffers a gout attack. Anne, summoned by Mrs. Meg, aids in tending to Anne, applying beef to her agonized leg, while Sarah distracts her from her torment. At dawn, Abigail ventures out to the forest, sourcing herbs to heal her scalded hand and maybe the Queen too. A passerby notices her, but she quickly wraps up her task and rushes back. Inside the palace, she takes the herbs that she's prepared to the Queen, telling the footman that the doctor orders it, and she threatens that he will be whipped if she doesn't give it to her. She slowly applies the herbs on her legs when Sarah arrives, and Abigail then tells her that this will help with swelling and inflammation. She tells the footman to take her to Mrs. Meg and that she's got to get 6 whips. While Anne struggles to concentrate on the war plans shared by the Prime Minister and Marlborough, she can't help but appreciate the soothing effect of Abigail's herbal remedy. Abigail, on the verge of receiving her 4th whip, is saved by Sarah, who walks in commending the Queen's comfort. Sarah instructs Abigail to gather more herbs while Abigail reminisces about her father's praises for Sarah, leading to her promotion in a room of her own. As the Queen's absence hangs in the air, Harley and the Prime Minister await her presence, only to be greeted by Sarah. She stands firm, advocating for the continuation of the war and suggesting land tax increases to bolster funds. Harley's plea for a treaty then falls on deaf ears, as Sarah and the Prime Minister remain steadfast in their stance. Sarah endorses Abigail's exploration of the library before bidding a heart-wrenching farewell to her husband heading to war. The next morning, amid the chaos of war preparations, Sarah invites Abigail for an outdoor escapade, a session of shooting birds. Sarah acknowledges her husband's departure with a melancholic acceptance of sacrifice. In the palace, Abigail discreetly trails Colonel Masham as he turns to catch a glimpse of her, and swiftly, she pivots and gracefully sets off in another direction, and intrigued, he inquires if she indeed was following him, only to be met with a clever twist of words as she claims that he is the one pursuing her. Engaging in playful banter, Masham probes further, asking if she's the same person he spotted earlier that morning on horseback. Abigail dismisses the notion, citing her lowly status as a servant that hinders her from owning a horse, and she somehow teases him in a very exciting way and makes him curious and fascinated before finally leaving. In the next scene, a festival ball welcomes the Queen, and Harley, the advisor, urges her to reconsider the task hike to prevent public outrage. Sarah intervenes, cutting back on the political talks at the social gathering. When Masham sweeps Sarah away for a dance, Queen Anne steals the show, commanding everyone's attention to stop the music, and on her way out of the ballroom, she tells Henry that the tax stays the same and that there is no doubling it. The hallway encounter between Sarah and Anne takes an emotional turn, with Anne striking Sarah in a moment of rage. The tension quickly evaporates, leading them to the library where they share an intimate moment under Abigail's unsuspecting eyes. She leaves and ultimately bumps into Harley, who invites her to go for a walk. During their conversation, she shares her past as a lady and how she feels like she's lost everything now. Inquisitive, Harley asks her about Sarah and if there's anything happening between them, and she assures him that she treats Sarah well and won't betray her trust. However, he forcefully pushes her down and insists that she reconsider. Meanwhile, after their intimate moment, Anna and Sarah spar over the ongoing war and the seemingly mundane matter of hot chocolate, revealing the complexity of their relationship. Sarah, asserting her influence, announces her intention to introduce the tax hike in the parliament. The familiar scene of shooting birds with Sarah presents Abigail with a chance to prove her loyalty, hinting at her knowledge of Sarah's secrets. The moment escalates when Sarah feigns a shot at Abigail, reinforcing her dominance with a veiled threat. In the midst of all this, Anne has consumed an excessive amount of sugar and is aimlessly wandering around the palace while Sarah is busy with calculations. Paige, a servant, approaches Sarah and informs her that the queen requires her presence urgently. As Anne attempts to leap out a window, Sarah intervenes, preventing her from doing so and gently placing her back on the floor. Sarah informs Anne that they will meet later in the afternoon and play a card game called Weisz. Abigail steps in for Sarah to accompany Anne, subtly shifting their dynamics. The encounter brings forth Anne's tragic past of lost children, symbolized by her pet rabbits. They bond over the shared afternoon, playing with the baby rabbits. The night takes an unexpected turn as Masham enters Abigail's room. She toys with him, leaving him more entangled in her web. Meanwhile, Sarah makes amends with Anna and takes her for a horse ride and apologizes for her previous actions. A dramatic scene unfolds as Anne navigates the palace, interrupting children playing violin in her discomfort. Her agony leads to an emotional breakdown until Abigail intervenes, gently coaxing her to dance. Just as they embrace the moment, Sarah walks in, adding another layer of complexity to their relationship. Soon after, Sarah accompanies Abigail for another soothing session, assuring her that she no longer expects her to assume the responsibility of dealing with the queen. However, Abigail insists that it's fine, protesting against Sarah's statement. Sarah, filled with rage, storms into the queen's chambers at the news of Abigail's summoning. Her wrath finds a dangerous outlet as she lays her hands on the queen, and amid this frenzy, Harley stumbles upon Abigail, who drops the bombshell about the imminent tax hike announcement. In the parliament, Harley's preemptive proclamation that the queen is not raising taxes throws the room into a whirlwind. The queen, bewildered, collapses on stage. Later in the forest, the tranquil moment is shattered as Abigail, engrossed in her book, hears odd noises. Masham, playing a mischievous predator, springs on her, igniting a playful scuffle. Back in the palace, Abigail lets curiosity take hold, trying on the queen's earrings and basking in her reflected glory. The queen, humiliated and disoriented, seeks refuge in her chambers, only to find Abigail sprawled on her bed. A quick exchange of excuses and Abigail hurries off, leaving the queen perplexed. An Abigail summons to the queen's room under the pretext of easing her pain unfolds into an unexpected scene. Sarah, informed about her husband's impending battle, discovers Abigail and the queen in an intimate embrace, and the sight leaves Sarah fuming. The Dawn sees Sarah venting her anger on unsuspecting books. When Abigail enters, she is accused of lying and theft, resulting in her demotion to a scullery maid. Abigail's despair reaches a crescendo as she sobs, nose bleeding, outside the queen's room. Sarah's decision to dismiss Abigail backfires as the queen appoints her a personal servant. Their journey in the carriage marks a power shift in the palace. In a moment of abandon, Sarah and Anne playfully frolic in the mud, their laughter echoing in men's voices, a testament to their shared history. Upon their return, Sarah issues a harsh prediction for Abigail's future, recounting her past with Anne. Abigail's retreat to her room leaves Anne commending Sarah's efforts to win her back. But when accused of playing games, Anne coldly dismisses it as reality. In her room, Abigail vents her fears and determination to Masham, vowing not to meet her father's fate, and she strategizes her rise, beginning with complimenting Anne's hair and tainting Sarah's tea. Sarah's ride in the forest turns hazardous as she succumbs to the effects of the poison tea, collapsing with one leg still hooked on a horse. Abigail, the puppeteer behind the scene, convinces Harley to request a favor from the queen, threatening him subtly. Harley then meets the queen, who's caught off guard by the news of a rebellion and Masham's intentions toward Abigail. The absence of Sarah sends ripples of concern through the palace, but when informed, Anne dismisses the issue with an ominous command to let Sarah be. Meanwhile, Sarah awakens in a stranger's home, dizzy and nauseous. A local woman greets her and urges her to rest. In the midst of all this, Anne, soaked in sweat, wakes up restless, yearning for Sarah. And with no news from the front line, she resists the Prime Minister's plea for military reinforcement, leaving the court uneasy. The Queen confides her anxiety about Sarah to Abigail, revealing the deep bond between them. In the same breath, Anne informs Abigail about Colonel Masham's marriage proposal to her. The newlyweds, Abigail and Masham, inhabit the East Wing, and in their private quarters, Abigail shares her suspicion of Sarah, preparing herself for any potential betrayal. Then Sarah, recovering, pleads with an indifferent man for a carriage, and instead, she asks for a horse and sends a message to the Prime Minister, sparking a curious rendezvous. Sarah then discloses the truth about her poisoning to the Prime Minister, and after a dramatic entrance, Sarah proposes a truce to Abigail. As dawn breaks, Anne's morning begins with Sarah's surprise return. Despite Sarah's explanation involving a beaver attack and her plea to banish Abigail, Anne remains unconvinced, accusing Sarah of jealousy. Then a meeting with Harley and the Prime Minister leaves Anne in command, issuing orders while silencing Sarah's objections with her royal authority. In the next scene, Sarah holds a powerful bargaining chip, a collection of intimate letters, a veiled threat of public scandal, which gives Sarah newfound leverage over Anne. However, Sarah's stay at court is abruptly ended by the footman's orders, and a desperate plea to Anne behind her secret door falls on deaf ears, and Sarah exits defeated. Anne surprises the Parliament, promoting Harley to Prime Minister and suing for peace with France. Meanwhile, the Queen's health takes a downturn, leaving Abigail scrambling. As Sarah writes a letter of apology and it arrives, Abigail discards it into the fire. Anne, amid her deteriorating condition, despite aiding their victory in the war, has been secretly taking things from them and demands his dismissal, thereby concluding the war. Anne is determined to exile Marlborough and Sarah from the nation. Meanwhile, back at their residence, Sarah and John observe soldiers assembling outside their home in order to execute the Queen's orders. In the final scene, while Anne is resting in her chambers, Abigail emerges, and subsequently, Anne calls for Abigail's present to attend to her, and Abigail, once more, assuming a subordinate role, proceeds to massage the Queen's legs. And that is where the movie comes to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. Make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, and most of all, subscribe to my channel. I love you all so much, and I promise to see you on my next recap. Bye.